thanks for such a nice, warm welcome and introduction. And some of you are realizing that we're not Vicki or Carolyn. So sorry that they could not be here. And when the 3% friends said, would you be up for stepping into this slot and talking about failure? It was like, yes. No one has more experience at failure than me and Janet. I'll say me more than you, Janet, really.
Not so much.
It's like, what could be a better topic, honestly? For those of you who don't know who we are, and since we're not written up in your, other people's are written up in your program, we're the co-founders of SWIM, which is a leadership skills consultancy, and we work with creative companies from Drugify to Refinery 29 to 72 and 70 on helping their people learn those skills that aren't taught in school or on the job. We started that in 2012, but before that, we had really long careers as chief creative officers at Ogilvy and Mather in Toronto, and had gone up the ladder together as a writer, art director team into that illustrious position. And so I guess our claim to fame when we were doing that was work for Dove, which was an account that we worked on forever, but we were part of the campaign for Real Beauty team. Yay!
Thank you, cheering section.
So we had lots of success in the jobs, from right out of school and going up and along. It wasn't like this. It was filled with these things. But yeah, I think we would be called we were very successful people in the industry, which is to say, like everyone else, we failed constantly, and failure is your friend. So that is, there's your first clue where we stand on the topic. I find it personally really interesting and maddening that they do not tell you in school that this is literally an industry that is all about failing, like all about it. They don't tell you, for every idea that you have that goes out into the world, let alone wins giant awards, there will be thousands in its wake that were declared failures. You will be hearing day in and day out from your boss, you failed. That's not good enough. Ow, 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 ow. We both spent our fair share of time, from school on, from right out of school on forward, trying not to cry. So there's that kind of everyday, failure. And then there's all the other classic moments to look back and say, I failed. What about in the presentation where, your part was not seamless as you look back and beat yourself up for that didn't work? Well, a perfect presentation, I don't know, maybe that's, maybe 4 out of 10, if you really think about it at best. Maybe you could be thinking back to the last interview you had where you might find yourself with 20/20 hindsight having just really not done as perfect a job as you might have. So failing, we do it all the time. And it is normal as can be, and yet nobody teaches us how to fail well. And failure is an opportunity for good things to happen. And that's what we kind of wanted to bring forward in this talk this afternoon is how we might look at it in a different way and spot the opportunity that's built into every failure.
So I once gave a career talk at school in Toronto. And eventually we hired a guy from that school, and he said to me, you scared me more than anybody that I ever met in advertising. And because I was in that class when you came and gave that career talk. And I said, but I'm not scary. Why did you feel that way? And he said, the first thing you said was, I spent the first 3 years of my career crying. and which is, actually true, pretty much. And a lot of that was connected to my own wrong-headed notions of failure. And failure is one of those things that is inevitable, and it's got all these really, like, oh, it's such a bad word, even saying it kind of makes you feel shitty, right? And, but it happens to everyone, it happens all the time, but what we mostly see is the mask of success, right? What we mostly see is people sitting up here and somebody's just lauded all the great things they did, and nobody says, oh yeah, here's 100 ways this person blew it when, and blew it before this thing happened and after this thing happened, because it's just kind of a part of life. And as a friend of ours says, there really is no failure, there's only learning. So it's part of it's the psychology of how we approach it, and that's the thing that, as Nancy says, nobody actually ever teaches us. And so I think it's important to start with confession. And this is kind of, not a very churchy environment. But I will confess to you all anyway, just to give you a notion. So I've been fired twice. Yep. And have lived to tell the tale. So the first thing I'm going to say is, pulling victory out of the jaws of defeat and all that stuff. Because the important thing is why, not what, right? It doesn't matter if something goes wrong. It doesn't matter in the end if something doesn't work. What matters is if we took something from it that we can apply in the future. So I'm just going to talk for a minute about the second time that I was fired, because all the lessons of failure in my life are inside of that story, which is that it was quite a long time ago now, and we had a client. I was working at the Obernet at the time, and we had BSF at the time as a client, and they made videotape. If you were born when there was videotape, they made VHS tape. And they had invented this technology that actually allowed you to slow down the tape so that you could have extra time, because the tape always ran out before the show. The tapes they made in those days used to run out before the show was over. So I had this idea that I genuinely thought was like the best idea ever, which was to create a series, like a mystery series. But you could only ever find out what the ending was if you bought the tape and switched it to the long mode. Come on, pretty good idea. No such thing. There was no such thing as, working in multimedia then, and I'm still trying to sell it. And if anybody's still using videotape, anyway, we went to, everybody in my clients in Canada thought it was great. We flew to Germany. We presented it to the bigwig clients there. They hated it. And I was devastated by this. And I came back, and of course we had to start over. And everything we came up with wasn't good enough as far as I was concerned. And in every presentation after, I kept bringing this idea back. And I literally couldn't let go of it. And I told my boss I thought he was a coward for not defending it. And I'd worked for him twice, so clearly I felt, privileged. And that he wasn't defending it hard enough, and he was willing to let crap go through, and, all that stupid stuff. And eventually he kind of fired me for being a giant pain in the ass. And, but what happened there was I didn't listen, and I was overly attached. And it's super easy for both of those things to happen because we love the things we make, right? They live inside of us really hard. And we love them, and it's very hard to let go, and it's very hard to hear why things aren't working for other people. And that was a problem for me in a relationship with one of my best clients, and that happened to me on other accounts. And the reason that I spent the first 3 years crying was because I was so attached to my ideas and I couldn't hear why they weren't working for somebody else. And the big learning for me was, oh, it actually wasn't about me. And that was a huge lesson to take forward. And ever after, I started to kind of keep the little note that Bill Bernbach is reported to have kept in his pocket, which was, what if they're right? He wrote on it. So I think that what I had to learn was humility. And in learning humility, I actually suddenly started to be much more successful.
Look at that learning.
I know. I learned something from that fail, and it served me well.
Well, we decided we'd both confess of a great fail story, or at least one that really is still extremely painful even years later. And I have so many to choose from. This was really hard to come to just one choice. But something that has never left me, and I did learn from, it was an epic failure, and it was something I did learn from on the spot, and is also a reminder into the future, was involved a client at Unilever, and we had, I don't even remember the idea, to be honest. I don't even remember if you were there. So you'll have to tell me.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, she knows.
I only know it once removed.
Yeah. The thing that everyone was talking about. There were a number of clients in the room. I was sharing an idea, and there were quite a few people from the agency there too. And most of the clients were actually really on board, but this one guy really was not. He was really, really not coming along, and I just got more and more and more frustrated. And I am somebody who's known for being the honest person in the room. I'm someone who's kind of known for, hey, Nancy will say it. We can kind of figure on that. And it's a time where I went too darn far, because what blurted out of my mouth, after much back and forth and much evidence he was not going to kind of be swayed, I said, but Andrew, maybe it's just you. Really smart, right? Because that's what I was thinking. And I'm feeling pretty self-righteous in the moment. And like Janet talking about saying to the boss, you're a coward. I guess you could tell we have a little bit in common. I say this to him, and everything goes deathly silent. And what could possibly go wrong with that kind of brilliant line of logic to try to bring a client along? So no, we did not sell it. It didn't go anywhere. But what I realized in very short order, it's one of those things you kind of realize it probably 5 minutes later, that was really not the thing to say. But sure enough, I took the penalties of not only not selling the work, but this was someone who would never buy an idea from me ever again. Right? Public humiliation will do that. So he's not buying anything I'm selling again. And I looked like, it was, if I thought for 1 second this was about him being a jerk, well, who looked like the jerk? I looked like a total jerk to him and everybody else in the room. My clients, my peers in the room. So in this example, I would say the wins I'm going to pull out of that epic fail, that big mistake, were many. And just some of them were, for God's sake, get a filter. I'm someone who needed to learn the lesson of, when you're that worked up and you have something right on the tip of your tongue that's probably going to be really negative, hold on that extra few beats to think harder about, is this really, honestly, first of all, going to help you get your way? And certainly, if you're about to say something that could damage a relationship, that's an even bigger reason to pause. So I really needed to learn the lesson of pausing. I also learned that when you treat someone with disrespect, it's not only bad karma. Trust is broken, and you will never come back from it. You break trust. And it was also an opportunity for me to reflect on empathy, something I did not have. And I think it's really, really easy for us to not have empathy for our clients. Never mind all the other people around us that we can not necessarily be thinking too hard about what it is to be in their shoes. Just because he didn't get it didn't make him an idiot. He just didn't get it. I had an opportunity to help him get it, and instead I did name calling, essentially. So empathy is another big area that that fail opened up for me as a place to really bear down on.
So, who in this room feels really comfortable with failure?
We can't see anything, by the
No.
way. There's like floodlights in our
You could
face.
shout. No, I can see you guys. I can see your silhouettes. So, does anybody feel like okay, or do you just kind of chew it over and like beat yourself up for days and weeks and months? And is that so? Would you say that I mean there are some men in this room as well as women, and pretty much nobody put up their hand to say they're good with it. And none of us are like loving it, of course. But I mean, who hangs on to it? Let me say. I hangs on to it. So it looked to me, from what I can see, that most of the hands that went up were female. So I want to ask you, what's female got to do?
That's a planted question.
But all the rest of it wasn't.
We have a book that we wrote more recently than the one that was alluded to when we were introduced, which is called Darling, You Can't Do Both, and it's a career guide for women. And so we did literally years of research into what trips us up. What trips us up on the way to our goals? And so my answer to that is really goes to learning I got not so long ago around the fact that women particularly struggle with the need to be perfect. Anybody like have that sort of like, I'm always like, better do it right, better not, failure's not an option. Who thinks failure's kind of not an option? Again, I can sort of see your hands going. I think there were a lot of hands doing at least this. Yeah, we are brought up to feel like we've got to be perfect, and in fact, I think women more than men really have an extra disadvantage in the workplace on this whole subject, because if we're going to go way out of our way to not fail, if we are going to avoid it at all costs, it tends to keep us in safe space, playing it safe. And that becomes more and more of a problem as we get more and more influence too, because we work with a lot of leaders who really struggle to delegate. And now this does not just apply to women, by the way. Men absolutely struggle with this too. If your fear of failure takes you to, I can't let my people fail, it really means, in many cases, that we are going to take a level of control to the process that tends to stifle creativity, doesn't support it. And, you can't, no matter how hard you try, you can't avoid failure anyway. And it can be your friend. Absolutely, it should be your friend. So as you'll find with more and more experience, as you have that maybe almost gut level drive to avoid those penalties, it's something to try and get good with, and create the space for people to mess up, and starting with yourself. I think that it's been observed many, many times. We all know there's all kinds of quotes out there about failing is wonderful, but there's a lot of truth to it. One of those is if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. So I think that's something to really reflect on. And another thing to think about as we're so busy avoiding failure and trying to strive for perfect, and can feel so bad when things don't quite go right. We often have the reflex to exaggerate just how bad the outcome really was. So that's another thing to have more mindfulness around, is to do that reality check on yourself, or have somebody else do a reality check for you. Ask them, because we tend to blow it up in our minds, and so often people don't even remember what you did that so-called went wrong.
True. People don't remember. Nobody cares as much about it as you do, right? None of this matters to anybody, really. That's the great thing about it. Failure is temporary, right? This is not a permanent state of affairs.
So how do you, here comes another planted question.
Should have planted them in the audience.
For all the talk about, there's all this wonderful benefit to failing, benefits to be found. Can you actually purposefully actively set out to find the win and the fail?
So in the work that we do that our company Swim does on a regular basis, one of the things that we do is work with a theater company in New York, and the teacher that we work with there, she uses this phrase, failing up, and which is what she tells her actors all the time, because everything is just a journey on the it's all about the next step and the next step and the next step. And so I love that phrase, because I think it really does bring the temporariness of it to life. And one of the things that she also asks is, what works about your greatest weakness? Which is like, what do you mean? Weakness is bad, and therefore nothing must work about it. But of course that's not true. And the mistakes are what make us human, I think. I was talking to, I don't know if anybody saw Piera Gilardi speaking earlier from R29, and she and I were chatting outside a little while ago. And I asked her how it went, and she said, I used to be so nervous, and I used to need to be so perfect whenever I went on stage in front of people. And I realized that I hated it. I hated speaking. I wasn't having any fun. And now I just say, do your best, have a good time, and pray for the mistake. Because the mistake is the thing that allows us to connect, actually, right? It's the humanizing thing that happens to us all. And it's a wonderful leveler. And it's always an opportunity to do better the next time. Your client hates your idea. That's okay. Come up with a better one. You can. It's your job. We all think, I love this thing so much, I'll never do a better one. Clearly, I have not gotten over my, videotape issue. But but the number of ideas that I have had killed in my life, I could fill an apartment building with those, and I just had to come up with a better one, and I wasn't always able to. But it was always an opportunity to. And if you're wrong about something, the chance to go back and say to somebody, you know what, I was wrong about that, and here's what I learned, and share that learning with them. Suddenly you're building your credibility almost in a way that the mistake allowed you to be more credible in the end than it would have been if you'd been right in the first place, because you owned it. You have some personal power in that, and that's a beautiful thing. You can write a personal failure report. Oh, that sounds like a really good time, Janet. Yay! I can't wait to do that. But if you do a personal postmortem after something that mattered to you, right? I mean, not something, that's neither here nor there. And do that, like, what did I do? Why did I do it? And do it over and over again, like do it every time it happens. Part of what it does is it allows you to start to create an objective distance between you and the issue, whereas if it all stays inside, it just festers and gets really ugly and bad for your confidence and all that. But if you write it down, then you can start to analyze it and look at it, and you start to see what your own patterns are. Like if I had done this a long time ago, I would have noticed that my fingers were in my ears and I was always crying. Instead of just, feeling it, I would have started to understand myself better. And in understanding yourself better and recognizing that kind of stuff, it gives you a chance to say, okay, now what am I going to do about it? So just the opportunity for self-awareness is pretty great. And it's just, I think that confessing is good for the soul. So finding like-minded people and sharing this stuff, and not for the purpose of beating yourself up, but for the purpose of growing, is actually amazing.
I think, you mentioned I like thinking of that as a personal postmortem, and I wish I saw more companies committing to always capturing the learning from, we blew the pitch, we do something, we lost a client. It's often missed. Does anybody find where they work that there's consistently, the meeting after the thing that went sideways, whether that's losing a pitch or whatever? Yeah, I'm seeing one hand go up, two hands. So a few places that happens consistently. It's such a miss to not reflect on what went wrong, why did it go wrong, and what can we learn from it. I mean, this is where all the great strides actually happen, thanks to these fails, to the degree that you could ever impact that happening in your team, perhaps, that you're working in. Highly encourage that you do your part for that to make its way into the environment that you work in. So it can be you and everybody else learning from these moments disguised as failure.
Have you guys ever heard of fuck-up nights? Is there there's one or two people in the room. Fuck-up nights is actually a fantastic global organization that is kind of like, the Moth, the storytelling, it's kind of like the Moth for business failure. And in cities all around the world, people go, and they are themed, and people go, and essentially they confess in public, like we just did, but possibly with better storytelling. And just to be in the company of other people and try to understand what happened and what did other people do about it, and what can we learn from them. And this was one of the things that Etsy did really well. When one of their engineers had a terrible failure, he actually sent his solution to it that failed, out to other engineers in the company, and then everybody started to confess what they, times that they had blown it, and started to ask each other what would they have done in their shoes. And then it spread to the whole company where they just started like having regular, monthly, everybody sat down like this and just talked about stuff that didn't work. And so just the openness of that was an amazing thing. If we have literally 2.5 minutes, and if you guys have questions, I see a hand up. I'm sure somebody does.
Yeah, I have a question. I was going to add, like, where you draw the line between being apologetic and being unapologetic about your mistakes. Sometimes I feel bad if I apologize too much, but if I don't apologize, I also feel bad. So where do you draw that line?
What a fantastic question. I don't know if you heard in the back. The question is, where do you draw the line between being appropriately apologetic and too apologetic? Is that fair enough? Yeah. Too apologetic. Again, as women, are we a bit prone to say, I'm sorry? Yes. And if you're Canadian too, like we are,
doubly affected.
Oh my God, it's a problem. I think, okay, rule of thumb for women, don't say you're sorry. You will, you still will. But if you're telling yourself, I'm just not going to say I'm sorry so much, it's probably going to be hitting the right balance automatically. I think it's really important to own mistakes. So seriously, it's really important and healthy to own mistakes. But if you're catching yourself saying you're sorry for something that by all rights, you didn't do anything wrong, then maybe that's a bit of a mental picture, is just wait that extra beat before you say you're sorry to make sure that's really the appropriate thing to say. I don't know if that helps, but it was a great question. Any other thoughts, questions, comments?
So I think when you ask people who's comfortable with failure, can failure ever be comfortable at the time, or is it after reflection and taking the positive things and things you learned, is that when you get comfortable?
Yeah, I don't know that it's possible to be comfortable with it, because our whole orientation as a society is to not fail. And comfort suggests, probably wrongly, acceptance, right? That this is fine, this is a good thing, right? And it is a good thing in that it is learning. It is a good thing in that we wouldn't have Post-it notes if, the sticky stuff hadn't failed, right? So I think that the point is finding what can you learn from it? What can you do with it? Is that thing that didn't work actually a different thing? If I use the Post-it notes as an example, right? Nobody was trying to discover Post-it notes, but they did out of failed glue. And so that to me is like the win and the fail right there, brilliantly. And so figuring that stuff out. So I don't mean complacent when I say comfortable. What I mean is recognizing that within that, for however painful it is, however ugly it is, however sorry you are, in every case, there's an opportunity to turn that into something that is valuable.
I think it helps to take, once you've, we're going to feel crappy no matter what, close to the event. But the sooner you can ask of yourself, hey, take the big picture. Let's try to look at this from a really high elevation. A, did I live? Check. Hey, it already wasn't that bad. You lived to tell. And yeah, maybe we could take the hair shirt off sooner than later and move forward, learning all the way. Our time is up. Thank you so much.